Hi folks, the Filipino P here. And today I'm going to be telling it like it is, as I compare the two most popular retirement destinations in Southeast Asia, the Philippines and Thailand. If you're thinking about living in this part of the world, you probably consider both countries and try to figure out which is the best for you. But what criteria are you using? What makes one country superior to the other? Well, I just completed my latest trip to Thailand where I got a chance to crisscross the country from north to south. And I'll tell you exactly what I found. The culture, the cost of living, the dating dynamics, all the stuff you guys might want to know so you can compare it to the Philippines. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert, all right? I'm just giving you my perspective. But while I was traveling, I kept my eyes and ears open and took the time to talk to the locals whenever I could. Maybe it's because I'm Asian myself, or maybe it's because people just tend to open up to me, but I came away with some insider information you might be interested in. So, how do the two countries compare? Let's get started. Have you ever been with a group of friends and someone mentions a movie they just saw, and one person starts raving about it, but another person says it was the worst film ever made, and you wonder how they can be talking about the same movie? Well, it's kind of like that when you start talking about countries too. The things that attract one person might repel someone else. It all depends on what you're looking for or what's important to you. And in some ways, the Philippines and Thailand couldn't be more different. One of the most obvious differences is the language. Most Filipinos speak at least conversational English, and many of us speak it quite well, but not so in Thailand. You'll find that you can communicate just fine in the bigger cities like Bangkok, especially to people in the hospitality industry, like the hotel staff, store employees, taxi drivers, government officials, and even cashiers at the grocery store. Pretty much all speak decent English. But once you get out into the country, their English ability goes right off a cliff, and it can be hard to get answers to even simple questions like how much things cost. I actually tried some different translation apps, but a lot of times what appeared on my screen bore no resemblance to anything I could make sense of, so it was really tricky. I even tried to do some interviews with locals that I thought you'd enjoy, but unless I was lucky enough to find someone who's fluent in English, like that taxi driver, they only had a very basic vocabulary, and it sometimes took 10 minutes of translations and rewording just to get an answer to a question. So the interviews turned out to be unusable for YouTube. So what does that mean for you? Well, unless you meet a person from the city, you might have a real problem with communication because Thai isn't an easy language to learn. Believe me, folks, I tried my best, even just simple phrases. They've got 72 letters in their alphabet, and every one of them looks like a brain teaser. Personally, for me, I couldn't be with someone I couldn't make jokes with or discuss things with, but everyone's different, and it just depends on what's important to you. I had a close expat friend who recently died from cancer. He chose Thailand because of all the conveniences, and when I asked him how he overcame the language barrier, he said he didn't even try. He didn't care if they could communicate or not. They could still have, companionship type of relationship. Now, I wouldn't be interested in that kind of a relationship, but to each his own. It's just something you'll want to consider when you weigh the pros and cons of each country. So what about the culture? How is it different from the Philippines? Well, one of the things you'll notice is how orderly their society is. People are quieter, more reserved, and they just seem to go about their business. Unlike Filipinos, we're kind of nosy. They don't interact with strangers like most of us do, and they don't stare at you or address you unless they have a reason to. Well, in the Philippines, some strangers will walk up to you and ask where you're from or where you live, are you single, and what your income is. And I get the sense that that doesn't happen much in Thailand. Appearances seem to be very important there, and Thai people are generally well dressed. The women wear skirts and dresses, and actually, I noticed a lot of men wear long sleeve shirts and slacks. And even the common people out on the street often look like they're dressed to go on a date. And Thai women are, I think, for me personally, they're taller and more slender than Filipinas. And I think they don't mind using makeup to look their best. It's more common there. Also, one thing I noticed, the couples I saw in the mall, they didn't look like they were really talking to each other. Even the young people, sometimes they just sit in silence, looking at each other, but they're just doing their own thing. It's very different from the Philippines. Maybe we're just generally noisy people. I don't know. There's also not as much Western influence there. I didn't hear any Air Supply or Beatles on the radio or in the grocery stores. And there weren't many Western programs on the telly either. And the ones I saw were almost always overdubbed in Thai. So you probably won't be able to assimilate as easily as you would in the Philippines. It could totally be my imagination, but there seemed to be a wall around Thai people that went beyond the barrier of language. Maybe it was because I was the outsider and having a little culture shock, or maybe it's because they're just harder to get to know. But if you want to make a good impression, here's a few do's and don'ts that are good to remember. So if you happen to drop Thai money on the ground, don't cover it with your foot to keep it from blowing away, because that's considered disrespectful because it has the image of their king. For the same reason, don't say anything derogatory about the government or the king in public or on social media, because that can get you in a lot of trouble there. And also, don't point at anything with your foot. And if a person is laying down, don't step over them. Just get around. And I think it's the same thing in the Middle East. They have a real thing about feet. And I think they consider it an insult to stick your foot at someone. I guess if you're a Thai guy with a foot fetish, you must be the lowest of the low. And on the other end of the body, please do not touch anyone's head or hair without asking. I think it's considered sacred and the cleanest part of the body. So walking up to a woman and pulling her hair is a serious faux pas. And as I already covered before, guys, please do not be loud. People might not say anything, but you get disapproving glares from the people around you if your voice gets too loud. Thais seem to respect silence, even in their taxis. Believe it or not, guys, the Grab app in Thailand even has a silent driver option where you can request the driver not to talk to you unless it's necessary, and not to play any music during the ride, which is, for me, that's good because, I don't know, I'm in a foreign place and I don't know how to start a conversation, especially if the language is the problem. But anyway, that's something refreshing. I haven't seen that here in the Philippines. Grab app like, shh, be quiet, don't talk to me. And one thing I noticed as well, you won't hear any music blasting from street corners or inside stores. It's more like a background elevator music you hear in the West. It's very soft. Another thing I found out you shouldn't do is believe a tuk-tuk driver if they say something is closed. I know, guys. They usually have an alternative agenda and just want to divert you to some place where they get a kickback for taking you. you know, my other video, I kind of know the scam, but you know, I didn't buy anything from those stores, so I think 100 baht is okay, and I had fun. But yeah, I heard that scam before I went there, and some folks in the comment section is like, "Oh, you just got scammed, P." But I didn't buy anything, so I think it's well spent, that 100 baht. And here's something you should do, especially if something doesn't have a price tag on it. Haggle. You can sometimes get stuff for 10 to 20% off, or so I was told. I tried it a couple times myself while I was shopping in Chatuchak Market and the Night Bazaar, but sad to say, folks, it didn't work. And I even tried the walk away tactic, but they still didn't lower the price. I don't know, I don't look like a farang. I kind of look like them, so I should have just given me the discount. Pen, it's too expensive. So anyway, what about infrastructure? Well, in my opinion, Thailand is about a generation ahead of the Philippines in terms of infrastructure, and I'll go over the reasons why. The highways are modern and the roads are generally in good condition. And you know what, guys? Their traffic is really orderly. Even in smaller cities, I'm actually surprised that the traffic actually moved and the street wasn't choked with trikes or bicycles and pedestrians and dogs and cows and goats. People actually stay in their lanes for the most part. Thais are polite drivers too. You know what? If someone is trying to pull into traffic, cars will stop and let someone in front of them, even if they have the right of way. And no one else gets mad and starts honking either. It's incredible. In the Philippines, it's whoever can muscle their way in front of someone else that wins. And big vehicles push around little vehicles, and cars just pull right out in front of you. Thailand is much more orderly, and they actually know what blinkers are for. They actually use it, folks. As far as power, I've been to Thailand several times before this trip, and I never had a blackout, or what we Filipinos call a brownout. Now, that's certainly not long enough to draw any conclusions, but my power in the Philippines here in Dumaguete usually goes out 2 or 3 times a week. So I guess the Thais have actually figured out how to provide reliable electricity to the population. And I always had a good internet signal almost anywhere I went, including in the middle of the jungle on the back of an elephant. I don't even have that good of a signal standing in my own living room. And you know what, guys? On average, I'd say that the internet speed in Thailand was probably twice as fast. So that may or may not be important to you, but for a person like me, I like my internet fast, but I hope we can figure that out here in the Philippines. Globe, Smart, please. Regarding healthcare, I really didn't get a chance to personally evaluate their system, but the people I talked to who'd lived in both places tended to give Thailand higher marks. One person made the comment that Thailand was orders of magnitude ahead in medical care, but I can't really verify that yet. But one thing for sure, we have the best nurses here in the Philippines. Anyway, one advantage that the Philippines has, at least for US veterans, is that they can get VA benefits, which means virtually free prescriptions. That has to be important to some of you folks. I think that's one of the reasons why expats are here, especially if they served. But overall, I'd give Thailand higher marks for infrastructure, and they look like they're always trying to modernize. You know, they even had those robots in some places that say hello to you while they're sweeping the floors. I think we're gonna see a lot of them, especially in places where wages are higher, which brings us to the cost of living. The average Thai earns $877 a month, and the average Filipino makes under 500. But the prices in Thailand for things like food and transportation are a little higher, maybe around 10 to 20%. Restaurant food in particular was surprisingly expensive, and an average meal at an average place was about $15, and even higher in places like, Bangkok and the city. You can get a good meal at a Filipino restaurant for a lot closer to 10, but their street food is amazing. There's a lot of variety. You can also save money on that. Grocery store food is pretty expensive too. I bought a few groceries for myself while I was there, and I was amazed how little $50 bought me. But at least they had stuff, I can't get where I live, like fresh milk, like good beef and cheese. So they must have access to dairy cows. But the biggest component of your budget is gonna be rent. I met with real estate agents in every city I went to and looked at what properties were available. From what I can tell, rents looked pretty comparable to the Philippines, but several agents said that rental prices have been increasing a lot lately. Thailand used to have the edge when it came to rent as far as what you got for what you paid, but the difference seems to be evening out. Overall, I think you might have to increase your budget a few $100s to live in Thailand. Like if you spend $1,000 a month in the Philippines, it'd probably cost you $1,300 to have the same life in Thailand, but at least you'd have the benefits of a better infrastructure. And now we get to the part of the video I think you've all been waiting for. My report on relationships between Thai women and foreigners. I was lucky enough to talk to a lot of local women and foreign expats about the dating dynamic in Thailand. I just walked up to people and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a sec?" And almost everyone said yes. Combined with the things I saw myself, talking to all these people gave me some good info to share. Like in the Philippines, status is very important here, and women are expected to marry up. But Thai women are more practical when it comes to their future and what it takes to get where they want to be. Filipinas often have this kind of naive optimism, and they fall in love very quickly. They get their feelings hurt easily, time and time again. Thai women are more like accountants that look at the balance sheet to guide their decisions. Now, I'm not at all saying they don't actually love the foreigners, the foreigner partners they're with. They just don't let their emotions decide everything like many Filipinas do until they've made their choice. But what about the ones that already have money? Wealthier Thai women, like wealthy Filipinas, are less likely to date a foreigner. It's not that foreigners are looked down on, it's just that a rich woman is less likely to compromise in the looks, age, and status department. Like other women around the world, if you want to marry one that's wealthy, you have to already be there yourself. And if you're dating a Thai woman from a poor family, you might be expected to make a cash payment, a dowry, with an agreed on amount. Although Mr. Boom Boom from my previous video, he said even Thai men, do the same thing. You're also going to be expected to financially assist the family for an extended period of time, maybe forever. In Thailand, the burden for supporting the family falls on the youngest unmarried daughter, according to some locals that I encountered. Whereas in the Philippines, it's supposed to fall on the eldest child of either sex. None of that seems to really matter though, because all the kids are ultimately expected to share their income with mom and dad if necessary. This support system is pretty much the same thing you can find in the Philippines. It's just more out in the open here in Thailand, and they discuss it up front. and a Thai woman will show you the price tag in advance, like a relationship prenup. In the Philippines, we try to smuggle it into the relationship. We don't really tell you that our ultimate goal is to have you support our entire clan. We'll start out slow with things like family emergencies and loans until one day you wake up and you realize you're the family's piggy bank. I know it's harsh, but you know what I'm talking about, guys, especially most of you that, live in the Philippines. Now, the Thai version of the poor provincial girl, like the ones you'll find in the northern part of the country, will definitely date foreigners and they'll accept larger age gaps. But generally speaking, I think Thai women might be more sensitive to age gap relationships than Filipinas are, especially in the cities. I didn't see any 60-year-old men with 25-year-old Thai women. I don't know, maybe I'm just in the wrong part of the city and, the wrong time of day. I don't know. But unlike most parts of the Philippines where big age gaps are a common sight, so you might end up with a Thai woman that's no more than 10 to 15 years younger than you. But I think, guys, overall, you shouldn't have much of a problem finding a mate in either country. Just be prepared for the language barrier to make things a little more difficult. I got a chance to watch a few foreigners as they tried to pick up Thai women, and it was funny to hear how they had to stick to really simple words until they figured out what level of English the woman spoke. I actually got approached by a couple Western guys that did the same thing, and you should have seen the relief on their faces when they realized my English was as good as theirs. And a few of them mentioned that they were having problems finding women they could communicate with. So I know it can be an issue. Thai men didn't approach me at all. I've been told that I look Thai and everyone I came across assumed I was. But maybe I don't fit their standard of beauty. Or maybe they have some other way of showing interest that I wasn't aware of. And finally, folks, I'd like to give you my general impression of Thailand. Things I noticed that might make a difference to you. First of all, I love not having to wear a mask all the time. It's no longer required there except in busy places like subway stations or shopping malls. A lot of people still wear them though, even when they don't need to anymore. So I guess it's just habit. Hopefully the Philippines will do the same thing, and soon, because it's hot outside and wearing a mask in the heat is no fun. Maybe that explains why there were a lot more foreigners in Thailand, and a whole bunch of them were younger ones, like in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And what really surprised me was that many of them had Western wives and families. So I imagine they were there for work. There were also a lot of single Western females, which is something you just don't see much if, here in the Philippines. Sure, there are a few, like in Boracay or Palawan, but they always have backpacks and they're mostly just passing through. One of the most obvious things about Thailand is how clean it is. I hardly saw any trash anywhere I went, and it gave the whole country a fresh, new feeling. And it's not just the lack of trash. It's the way they scrub and wash everything. You know how the windows of stores get all dirty from fingertips and, from people touching the glass? Not in Thailand, at least not the stores I saw. Even the 7-Eleven had spotless windows, and there was always someone wiping the counter and cleaning and polishing. That's one thing I really wish we could fix in the Philippines, because in Thailand, people just don't litter. It's obviously been ingrained in the public consciousness, and it shows. And as I mentioned before, there were very few stray animals on the streets compared to the Philippines. By the way, guys, I asked the locals, do they eat dogs? And they said no. They just have good rules, rules and regulations, and they have animal control, and they have shelters. Also, I think because of their economic situation, there were fewer beggars on the street too, which is a good thing. But the thing I noticed the most was a sense of freedom. There were no guards at every door, and I wasn't asked to constantly show my papers all the time. To get into an airport here in the Philippines, you have to show your ticket just to enter the building, which involves waiting in another line, and then you have to keep showing your boarding pass at a bunch of checkpoints. You know what, in Thailand, you just walk right in and no one hassles you. When you go to a Thai mall, they don't have to inspect your bags, and I never felt like I was being herded all the time like cattle. Everything moved quickly and efficiently, and I really enjoyed that. But, and you knew there was gonna be a but in there somewhere. Although Thailand has a lot of benefits as far as the quality of life, and the Thai people were very polite and hardworking. It just felt like there was a missing ingredient that still might tip the scales in favor of choosing the Philippines. Okay, to use the analogy of a family, Thais would be the successful older brother who breezed through college and already has a great job. Filipinos would be the obnoxious little brother like a Ferris Bueller who always manages to get in trouble. But somehow you have to love him anyway. There's just something about the Filipino people that makes them warm and friendly and easy to bond with. Maybe it's just me because I am a Filipino, or maybe there's some cultural differences that keep ties at arm's length. I don't know. But for me, I'd rather live in a country where I felt close to the people, even if we have to spend half our lives waiting in lines. If we could manage to combine the best of both places, that would be an amazing country. One good solution might be to choose your partner in the Philippines and then go live in Thailand. Who knows? But I can certainly understand how different people choose different places because there is no better country. It just depends on what you need to make you happy. Well, that's the end of my Thailand adventure, and since you might have had different experiences, feel free to post what you think I got right and what you think I got wrong in the comment section. Now I'm back to my regular content and I've got some good stuff coming. See you on Friday. Bye. If you think about it, I'm kind of like your massage therapist, helping you relieve all the stress and worries about life in a new country and making sure to hit all the trigger points of local culture and costumes. The only thing I ask for my service is that you please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you're not late for your next session. And please consider becoming a patron so you can see all the extra content and exclusive videos on my Patreon page. And while you're waiting for your next appointment, feel free to check out these other videos too. So, are you ready for your massage? I promise I won't rub you the wrong way. Unless you ask me to.